Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. I have recently been playing Dark Souls 1 again, and through my travels I have become interested in an element of lore that has not been adequately covered, in my opinion. I am referring to the lore regarding the Kingdom of Boulder and the Knights of Berenike. The only real look that this lore got was from 4 years ago by Epic Name Bro. I watched it, and suffice to say it was a little bit, well, silly, maybe? Watch it and see for yourself. I just feel like the topic wasn't done much justice, so let's chat about it a bit. As well as Boulder and Berenike, we'll be touching on the Way of White as well, which I think has a very, very interesting and suspicious connection to Boulder and Rendell, but we'll get into that as we continue. The foremost figure in Boulder lore is Night King Rendell, a leader who was very highly renowned and has many strange, fantastical stories and rumours revolving around him. In medieval society, it was rare but not completely unheard of for kings to fight alongside their men on the front line, notable examples being King Richard III and King Harold, both kings who had succumbed to their injuries on the battlefield. I find this relevant to Rendell as both the titles Knight and King are in his name. Given that many of his exploits regarding combat have been remembered, I think it may be an interesting concept to consider that Rendell was a very capable fighter indeed, leading his armies to many victories. His general timeline pre-Dark Souls 1 is that he led his army in a mission of glory to Anor Londo, but it was halted in Sen's fortress, went hollow and fell victim to moonlit magic, but we will get onto that a little later. An interesting item regarding Rendell is the Ring of Steel Protection, an item that has appeared in all 3 Dark Souls games. Its description in Dark Souls 1 reads, "This ring belonged to the Night King Rendell. It grants its wearer protection by boosting defense against physical attacks." Of the many legends surrounding the Night King Rendell, one of the more well-known speaks of him standing down a giant drake and slashing it to pieces. Interestingly, the description of the ring in Dark Souls 3 is written in quite a similar way, following the format of ownership, effect, and rumour. It reads, "Ring of the Night King of ancient legend, increases physical damage absorption. The Night King was said to be lined with steel on the inside, such that even the talons of mighty dragons did him little harm." We can take from this that Rendell was a figure of discussion in his kingdom, and that his influence spread far and wide. It must have been at least somewhat mysterious, seeing as so many rumours have cropped up regarding him. What we do not gain insight into, however, is the nature of Rendell's rule. Was he a fair ruler, a man of mercy, or a calculating sociopath? Let's continue investigating and see what we can turn up. Whatever influence Boulder as a kingdom might have had pre-Dark Souls 1, it is clear that those days of power and glory are now long gone. The only remnants of this now forgotten kingdom are the Boulder Knights and possibly the Knights of Berenike as well. The inevitable question is to ask, of course, how did so many of these knights end up in Anor Londo, or near Anor Londo? They are not native to the land of the gods, after all. Our understanding begins when we look at the description of the Boulder set, which reads, "Armour worn by the knights of the ancient kingdom of Boulder. It is made from thick iron plates." Boulder was the homeland of the Night King Rendell, but it came to ruin after a great many undead were spawned. As we can read, the undead curse struck Boulder, and likely destabilized and eventually crippled the kingdom, similar to how Drangleic and Lothric would be affected. However, there are a few interesting implications. Firstly, the mentioned undead were spawned. This made me very curious because I remembered something that Hawkshaw had talked about in his Way of White video. I draw your attention to the description of the Paladin set. The description reads, "Armour of Leroy, Paladin of the Catacombs. Long ago, the Way of White produced its first undead, a paladin in golden armour. With the legendary treasures Grant and Sanctus, Leroy set out for Lordran, land of the gods, in the first Undead Mission of the Way of White." Initially, when Hawkshaw proposed that the undead curse itself may have been created and engineered by the Way of White, I was gobsmacked. I'll link the full video in the description below, as it is definitely worth watching. Now, whether you believe in that theory or not, it is interesting, since the origin of the undead curse is never really specified in absolute detail, only that it came after the advent of the Age of Fire, close to the end of the Age of Fire itself, at least in the cycle we experience. Because of this, I am convinced that it is a topic ripe for debate. For the sake of this video, let's investigate a bit more with this theory in mind. The use of the verb spawned really makes me believe that the undead were purposefully created in Boulder, but by who and why? It seems that the undead that were created grew out of control and infected the rest of the populace in some way. Let us now look at the currency of Boulder and what it may tell us. There are 3 coins available in Dark Souls 1, copper, silver, and gold. They may illuminate us as to why the undead curse came to Boulder. The copper coin displays the face of Old Man McLoif, god of drink and medicine. The description which it shares with the other 2 coins reads as, "Even coins of great value in the world of men have little value in Lordran, where the accepted currency is souls. Those who dream of returning to the outside world are fond of carrying these around." As an aside, I believe it's important to mention that the description defines the difference between the world of men and Lordran as 2 quite different places. These coins have little to no value in Lordran. The coins have their own stories to tell, but for the moment let's see how they relate to Boulder. The copper coin is given, curiously, by Petrus, a cleric of the House of Thorolund. I find Petrus a very interesting character in his own right, but let's stick to his connection to Boulder for the moment. If souls are the currency of Lordran, then we can assume that these coins, the currency of the world of men, are accepted in more places than just wherever Petrus comes from. There is more evidence for this due to where we find the silver coins, but we will get to that shortly. Through some coercion, Petrus reveals something to us that I believe has been a bit overlooked over the years. I refer to Petrus's dialogue after you pay him some souls while trying to understand what he and his companions are doing in Lordran. He says,
"Very well. I can surely tell you, of all people, undead clerics are given a mission to seek kindling. Kindling is the art of feeding bonfires with humanity. Through kindling, we shall one day be granted magnificent powers."
This mission seems to be separate from what Rhea is trying to achieve as a maiden learning miracles. Petrus, and presumably other undead clerics of the Way of White, see being undead as an opportunity to harvest humanity. We know as players that humanity can be used to increase the number of Estus charges available, restore health, and summon warriors. Humanity is being weaponized by the clerics. If you didn't already view the Way of White as a shady institution, I'm sure you do now. Anyway, the most important element of this is the Undead Mission, a task that Leroy also undertook as an undead paladin. Next, we have the silver coin, which bears the face of Night King Rendell himself. 5 of these coins are found after defeating a mimic in Sen's fortress. This is an interesting point, considering that many Boulder Knights probably attempted to pass the trap-laden fortress. It's possible that this mimic was a former Boulder Knight, considering it drops 5 coins depicting the King of Boulder. Alternatively, however, it could just be someone who looted the corpses of the Boulder Knights after they were felled by serpent men and traps. I think the most important element to this is that the silver coin is part of a tiered currency system, and if Petrus has coins that are also accepted in places like Boulder, we can assume that the faces on the coins have a connection in some way. This will come into play a little later. I find the fact that Rendell's likeness has been put on coins among deities and religious leaders of the highest echelons really goes to show just how legendary Rendell must have been in his heyday, but subsequently how he would have been considered lesser than those who have shared audience with the gods. Finally, we have the gold coin, which displays the face of the elusive yet fascinating Allfather Lloyd. I want to tread very carefully here, as my investigation into Lloyd is not extensive, and I believe he is worthy of his own video at some point. What we can say with some certainty, however, is that Allfather Lloyd was an incredibly important figure, at least before and possibly during the events of Dark Souls 1. The description of the white seance ring reads, "A divine ring entrusted to the head bishop of the Way of White, an apostle to Allfather Lloyd, uncle to Lord Gwyn." The head bishop of the Way of White is the guardian of law and caste, and one of the great royals of Thorland. We learn from this that Allfather Lloyd was Gwyn's uncle and an important figure in the Way of White, and other item descriptions imply that Lloyd could have had an involvement in the founding of the Way of White itself. As a total side note that I have found too interesting not to include, let's have a quick look at the jewel charm very quickly. It has a description that reads, "Tool used in Jewels of Judgment. Nulls effects of special area effects for a short time." Allfather Lloyd's knights lived in fear of his Jewels of Judgment, in which verdicts were carried out by his sword of law. The reason that I find this so cool is because the only sword of law or judgment that we know of is one of Pontiff Sullivan's greatswords, specifically the Greatsword of Judgment. Coincidence or not, I'll let you decide for yourself. Anyway, back to Lloyd's connection to Boulder. So what we know is that Lloyd's face is represented on the currency in the world of men, but has no worth in Lordran itself. Despite this, the gold coin is found in a few interesting places. Firstly, in Anor Londo, in a chest defended by a silver knight, in the painted world of Ariamis, and also in the royal wood of Ulasil. And if it is taken, it causes enemies in the area to become hostile towards you. What is important as we move forward is to remember that on the currency, both the King of Boulder and the apparent head of the Way of White are depicted. Allfather Lloyd had a place in the world of men, a presence that was obviously respected as a holy figure, at least among most clerics. Knowing this, let's move on. Remember when we were talking about Paladin Leroy, how he was given an undead mission, and how he was the first undead produced by the Way of White? I'd like to share something with you that I hadn't noticed until quite late into the production of this video. I noticed it when looking at the Paladin's ashes found close by to the Cathedral of the Deep's entrance. The icon of the ashes depicts a hand holding Allfather Lloyd's talisman, and unlocks Lloyd's shield ring at Firelink Shrine. Paladin Leroy is also the only paladin referenced in the entirety of the Souls series. Using this information, we can now say with certainty that Allfather Lloyd has a direct link to the purposeful production of undead, paladins of the Way of White, and Boulder. Something worth noting as well is what is said about the Berenike Knights, warriors of huge stature and strength. The description of their armor set reads, "Countless knights of Berenike, once extolled as the mightiest of mighty, became undead and ventured into Lordran. But their journey was for naught, as they went hollow and became a threat to all undead." It is a point that should be reiterated that to many, becoming undead was seen as a blessing, with the ability to die and get back up to fight some more until one goes hollow. It's interesting that they became undead before heading to Lordran, almost as if it were a rite to undertake before travelling into what would be considered certain death. It has been confirmed that the Way of White can produce undead warriors for secret missions, so perhaps the Knights of Berenike were no different. Their nature as undead would have strengthened their resolve to advance through Sen's fortress, and as we will discover, some of them did. We discover a Berenike Knight in the Painted World, which means one made it at least as far as Anor Londo before perhaps retreating into the snowy mountain top. The other we find is more interesting and is referred to as a Dark Moon soldier. He appears alongside a Boulder Knight, and both are not hollow, but probably still just undead. They face you in combat in the Ornstein and Smough area after you shatter the illusion of Guinevere and appear, from their name, to be allied with Gwendolen. It seems that these two are the only successful challengers to pass through Sen's fortress alive, perhaps proceeding to the Dark Moon tomb to pledge allegiance to the Blades of the Dark Moon, but this is all impossible to say for sure in regard to their intent. A point I began talking about earlier that I would like to resume talking about now is the reason why Rendell and his knights came to Lordran. Frustratingly, it is not spelled out for us, but we can theorize all the same. I'd like to begin by looking at the crestfallen merchant's dialogue who wears the armor of the Berenike Knights. He states,
I took on Sen's fortress alone, but I'm no different from those vile creatures. I was driven by conceit. Ah, you think you're different? That you can handle it? Yes, I remember that feeling, for I was the same.
It's difficult to say for sure whether this character is actually a Berenike Knight or simply impersonating one, but the fact that he took on Sen's fortress does lean towards the former as a possibility. Conceit means to be prideful, but that doesn't really tell us anything concrete about their motives. More interesting is the following dialogue.
Let me give you a nibble of advice. Don't even consider visiting Anor Londo, not in your state. For a century they've tried and failed. The Night King Rendell, Black-Iron Tarkus, and even Logan himself.
If this is to be taken literally, then for 100 years, legendary warriors have attempted to reach Anor Londo, including the famed leader of Boulder, the mysterious Tarkus, and Big Hat Logan, who we find in Sen's fortress. However, it's important that we don't bunch these characters together in their motivations, as we know that Logan wasn't trying to conquer or loot Anor Londo. He wanted to get to the archives to learn more about Seath and his immortality. Therefore, I believe there are a few possibilities as to why Rendell was trying to get to Anor Londo. Please note that the following will have a fair bit of speculation, and I invite you to discuss and refute them should you wish. Possibility number 1, linking the flame. Of course, it's possible that Rendell wished to link the flame and fulfill the prophecy, but it's not a definite answer. It seems that the linking of the fire only attracts those who don't really have a legacy trailing in their wake. Oscar of Astora makes it known that, at least in his family, the journey to Anor Londo is a quest, a rite of passage, but of course this is no need to apply this to Rendell or his knights. Possibility number 2, revenge. If Rendell was the revered and legendary king that we have heard him to be, I would imagine that the strength of his kingdom would be important to him. To see it collapse before his eyes before an outbreak of a plague that traces its origins back to the Way of White, why not give a bit of payback to the gods who are partially responsible for the downfall of Boulder? Possibility number 3, answers. Perhaps Rendell's choice to travel to Anor Londo with his knights is similar to our mission in Dark Souls 2, to seek a cure for the undead curse and eventual hollowing that happens. If Rendell loved his people, then he would want to help them in any way he could. Unfortunately, since we have such little insight into Rendell's nature as a leader, it is really difficult to discern his motivations for taking the actions that he did. I'll leave the choice up to you. Perhaps you have an idea that I didn't even mention. Hopefully you can tell me what you think in the comments. When I was asking some people about what they thought of Boulder as a topic to talk about, many of them didn't even know what I was referring to. However, I can say that after looking into them, they were a very interesting topic to investigate. It goes to show that no matter how small or insignificant the lore may be for a character or kingdom, it can also always be extrapolated to reveal more. I can definitely say that my knowledge of Boulder will add to my enjoyment of future playthroughs of Dark Souls 1. As usual, I thank you for watching yet another lore video. If you enjoyed what you watched, be sure to sub and all that jazz, and leave a comment telling me what you want to see next. Until next time.